Good morning, everyone. I'm Madhabi Chatterji from the Department of Social and Organizational Psychology. That's the program of Social and Organizational Psychology in the Department of Organization and Leadership at Teachers College. I'm an associate professor of measurement and evaluation and the director of the Assessment and Evaluation Research Initiative that is hosting this wonderful event. I am so honored on a personal level and on behalf of our center to welcome you to Teachers College as well as to New York City. I'm sorry that the weather hasn't cooperated. I hope our turnout will become better. We have over 300 people registered, and it may be that the weather has delayed some of them. I hope they get here safely. This conference is a part of Teachers College's 125th year celebrations, and this means a lot to us at AERI. So I thank President Susan Furman and Provost Tom James for giving us this opportunity and privilege to do this for the college. I also want to acknowledge our partners, the Department of Educational Policy and Social Analysis, the Institute of Urban and Minority Education, and the Gordon Commission. We have several families of TC faculty who have been associated with measurement, evaluation, and assessment over the years, and some of whom helped in shaping the formal field of educational measurement. And you know the names, Edward L. Thorndike, Robert L. Thorndike, and others. Their family members will be here with us today, and I just wanted to thank them. They may not have arrived as of yet, but if they are in the audience, thank you for coming. If you look at the speakers, it is no exaggeration when I say that this is going to be a treat for all of us. To help us open this event, I'm honored to introduce two very special leaders and scholars from our institution, Provost Thomas James and Professor Warner Burke. Let me say a little bit to introduce them to you. Dr. Tom James became Provost, Dean, and Vice President of Academic Affairs for Teachers College on July 1st, 2007. And he is also on the faculty at TC's Department of Arts and Humanities. Dr. James was formerly Dean of the School of Education at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where during his tenure, the school increased its research funding, generated more faculty research that was field-based in community and school settings, placed more of its teacher education programs in public schools, forged new ties with policymakers at the state and federal levels, and developed strong collaborations with other areas of the university. Previously, Dr. James was Vice Dean and Professor of Educational History at New York University's Steinhardt School of Education, and prior to that, a tenured professor at Brown University. A historian by training, he is the author of Exile Within, The Schooling of Japanese Americans 1942 to 45, viewed as a seminal text on the internment of Japanese American children during World War II. Dr. James also attended, as a child, the famous laboratory school at the University of Chicago, founded by the iconic TC philosopher and educator John Dewey. So who better to help open a historic event than a historian like Dr. James? So Tom, thank you for agreeing to do this for us.
And Madhabi, thank you for that very generous introduction. It's really a delight to be here with you today and to be celebrating this conference, which resonates so deeply with TC's history. And just to give you a sense of that in terms of this institution today, that 1/4 of all our faculty members are psychologists, or trained in psychology, 25%. So not only is Thorndike Hall sitting centrally here as our largest building and housing many of our programs, But when you look even beyond the psychology programs, beyond the 8 or so programs there, look into teacher education, look into leadership, across into health, you will find a central presence of the discipline of psychology. And when you look back to the beginning of the 20th century and you look at not only Edward Thorndike, but a whole group of faculty around him, but in his own case, he was one of the founding pioneer members of the American Psychological Association. And when APA began, educational psychology was, at the foundation stone, along with, several other key elements of the discipline of psychology at that time. So the taproot of this discipline, and also the presence of it today within this college, is much, much stronger than you would see on the surface. Just looking at the organization chart, it's pervasive. And we talk about education, psychology, and health as being the trinity of Teachers College. The truth is that psychology is pervasively involved across all of those. And perhaps the same could be true of health, that we're interested in the integration of health and education, how people can be healthy learners. And of course, psychology is deeply invested in that. Another way of looking at this, and I think, maybe as a historian and somewhat of an anthropologist, of looking at the tribes that grow over time in academia. And if you begin to trace out from Teachers College, I can't even take the time now to read the family tree of psychology here, the many, many names, the mentors, the students, the succession of faculty. It would take me too long. You're going to hear more about those names today. We're going to be talking about them actually in all phases of the conference because they reoccur in everything that we are doing. But if you follow that, that long history, and you trace it out from Teachers College to the University of Chicago, to Stanford, to state universities, graduate students who are then producing other students, you begin to see that Teachers College was indeed a seedbed of educational psychology and related fields all over the country. There's a kind of wave effect of what was going on here and moving out. And the same was true in professional development. You take just one piece of the father Thorndike's work, where he was producing a list of vocabulary for teachers based upon scientific research of children and cognitive change. So not just a word list like in the 19th century, which tended to be cultural artifacts, but a word list that was connected with research about advances in human learning. And that type of work then went out into professional development channels. It became part of the early formation of associations, the groups like the National Council for Teachers of English, like AERI and so forth. And that scientifically based work became fundamental to the notions that people had about professional development and about the development of teachers, teacher education, and things like that. So psychology was very deeply embedded in the discipline of education. Of course, it moved out well beyond there. And there are also memories here of the, when there were rats in the basement, and the kind of the idea of the scientific experimentation that was very, very different from the ways that education was approached in the previous century. And I think it's just fair to say that this institution was really at the heart of that notion of the scientific study of education, of human learning of human development, of disparities in learning, really breaking down the different forms of mental activity and social settings that created learning at its best. That is our legacy as an institution. This conference is very much about that. And even though I have not read to you the long litany of all the names and mentors that lead up to the present, I've given you a sense, in a sense historically and maybe anthropologically, what that looked like. I want to say a little bit more about this faculty of ours over time and what it has meant. All of the graduate students who study here, who produce dissertations, use the APA style, this is a fairly routine aspect of graduate education, but in terms of citation style, which has become the dominant style within AERA. And when you trace that back, part of what that means is that the research paradigm in psychology, was one that began to inform other disciplines about what is the proper mode of peer-reviewed work in education. And I say that as a historian because our field, which is a very old field, came into being, of course, was very famous in this institution with Larry Kremen and others. And yet the notion of what the underlying research protocol is for recognizing other work, for fairly citing it, for being judged by the ways that you use work, and the recency of scholarship, and making sure that you're really tying in with that. I think we owe a debt to psychology of having defined that central paradigm. And perhaps it's no accident that psychology is in the American Academy of Sciences, because it's created this loyalty to a kind of research paradigm that can be used anywhere at any time with validity and able to check. There are lots of stories about our psychologists here, and we have some that have come to us as we've set up this conference. And I just want to take a pause a moment here in my comments to thank Madhabi Chatterji. She spent some time thanking other people, but she has put an enormous amount of really good work and effort and discerning effort into organizing this, working with each of the partners, making sure that we are in communication with one another, that what we're doing is sensible, and that we have the shape of a conference that really does everything that we can do in one day. Untold amounts of labor there, certainly, in trying to figure this out and communicating with people. I know just from what I received in terms of emails, to help me get to this moment when I'm standing here with you. I want to thank her for that. And so you're going to have a day today that's going to be looking back, as I've been doing, but you're maybe in a little bit more detail with the panel, looking forward, with kind of a reassessment of where assessment should be going with the Gordon Commission and that work, and also thinking about the dynamics and the politics of testing, which is very intense. And I just want to make one final comment to you before turning this over to my colleague, Professor Burke, which is this debate about testing, the debate about forms of testing and methodologies and equity, the social movements that form around testing, is also part of TC's history and our legacy. If you were to go back to the 1920s, that was a very heady time of debate, where Walter Lippmann was publishing his editorials, which were raising many questions. John Dewey was, I suppose, disagreeing in a number of ways with Thorndike and others. And so that this institution, these 7 buildings, I think there were fewer than 7 at this time, these 3 or 4 buildings at that time, were a place of debate about psychology, about measurement, about its use for human learning, and the fairness of that use. And I think that's part of our legacy. It's certainly part of our present, what's going on in this world today, and I know it will be part of our future. And so this conference so beautifully represents our culture. I just want to bring that into view for you, that this is the type of community that we want to be, where we are looking at past, present, and future, and we are debating. We're debating the values and the science and the utility of this world of testing and measurement.
I will take a few minutes to introduce Professor Burke to you. Professor Warner Burke is the Edward Lee Thorndike Professor of Psychology and Education and the coordinator for the graduate programs in social and organizational psychology at Teachers College. He is also the associate editor of the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science. I have to get my glasses on. Prior to coming to TC in 1979, he served in senior positions at Clark University, the NTL Institute, and as executive director of the Organization Development Network. Professor Burke's consulting experience has been with a variety of organizations in business, industry, education, government, religious, and medical systems. A diplomate in the industrial organization psychology through the American Board of Professional Psychology. He is also a fellow of the Academy of Management, the American Psychological Society, the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology, and past editor of both Organizational Dynamics and the Academy of Management executive. He has authored over 100 articles and book chapters in organizational psychology and co-authored or edited 14 books. He has received numerous awards, and I'll mention just a few, including the 1989 the Public Service Medal from NASA. In 1990, the Distinguished Contribution to Human Resource Development Award. In 1993, the Organizational Development Professional Practice Area Award for Excellence. And then in 2003, both the Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Award from the Academy of Management and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Organization Development Network. I warmly welcome Professor Warner Burke.
Thank you, Madhabi. My remarks will be shorter than that introduction. Just a word or two about who Edward Lee Thorndike was, who he was, and what he was known for. So to kind of set the stage for concentrating on what he stood for seems appropriate to me. Edward Lee Thorndike was born in 1874 in Lowell, Massachusetts, the second child of a Methodist minister. According to birth order research, that would mean that a second child would be rebellious, as opposed to a firstborn who stays the course. Apparently that was not true, because he did go to Wesleyan College, where his father had connections with respect to the Methodist religion, and got his bachelor's degree there in English, not psychology. But he read a book by William James, who was the psychologist of the time at Harvard University, and wanted to go to Harvard to study with him, and did, and got his master's degree at Harvard with William James. And for a time, lived in the lower part of William James's home, and had 2 chickens in the basement of that home, where he studied behavior of animals. And so that's what began what later became a book that he wrote called Animal Intelligence. But his dissertation was with a cat, not with chickens, and not with rats, by the way. He stayed with the animal that would prey on the rats, called a cat. So he went to Harvard, got his master's degree, but then a psychologist here at Columbia by the name of Cattell knew about him and asked Thorndike about considering coming to Columbia to get his PhD, which he did. And at the age of 24, he had his PhD. And then his first academic job was at the Women's College of Western Reserve in Cleveland. Apparently, he hated it. He only stayed there 1 year. And Dean James Russell of Teachers College found out that Thorndike was unhappy, so he went after him to come back to New York and to be a professor in the instructor level here at Teachers College. And Thorndike was here 40 years, as it turned out. So that was one heck of a move. But, you know, it was Cleveland. What would you do if you had been? So he was at TC from 1899 to 1940. So what was he known for? He was probably known best, as Tom pointed out, as the educational psychologist of the day, and in fact was probably the founder of the field of educational psychology. And then, of course, the testing movement, as we might refer to it. It'll be interesting to see what people have to say today about those words and that kind of language. So if he was first an animal psychologist, a behaviorist. So he's looking at behavior, and he was the creator of what became known as the law of effect. The law of effect simply says that a behavior followed by a pleasant experience is likely to be repeated. Or in other words, the behavior is likely, if it's followed by a positive experience, is likely to be what he called stamped in. So he did not believe that learning occurred according to insight. You know, the light bulb that turns on? No. He thought it was trial and error. And that came from animal kind of behavior that he observed and recorded. So that trial and error process led to the way in which he founded the way we look at learning among children at this college. So he had something to do with our approach to the study of learning, especially with children, but particularly also with adults. He did not limit himself to children. It was also adults. He was also the co-founder of the Psychological Corporation, becoming one of, if not the leading authority on the analysis of measurement and learning. And no doubt, being a corporation, he did fine with some of the things he created and put out on the marketplace. I appreciate the fact that Madhabi mentioned some of my numbers with respect to publications and books, but doesn't hold a candle to Edward Lee Thorndike. How many books did he write and publish and edit? Just 78 is the number. How many articles did he write and publish? Over 400. So one can be rather humbled by, well, speaking for myself. So he was president of the American Psychological Association. Tom mentioned that. He was admitted to the National Academy of Science. In 1924, he was the president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and so forth. So that's just a small number of things that he was known for. Now there's just two other comments. There's something I've never been able to quite trace. I don't quite understand how it happened, but the way I understand it was that when Thorndike came back to New York and to Teachers College, he knew people, as we say, across the street, over here, called Columbia University. He knew them because that's where he got his doctorate, right? So lore has it, I don't know if it's true, I can't trace it, but lore has it that he struck a deal with a psychologist over there, and the deal was that applied psychology at Columbia University would be at Teachers College. Applied psychology meaning clinical, school, counseling, and organizational psych, my own field. So in other words, that informal agreement, I've never seen a signed contract about it, but that informal agreement lasts to this very day, which means that if you're going to get a degree in some form of applied psychology, you don't have a choice at Columbia. You're going to get it at TC. And that's been honored for all these years. It's amazing. And I just don't know quite how that happened. Thorndike supposedly was the broker for that, but I'm not sure about it. But I want to believe it, so carry on the mystery about how applied psychology ended up at Teachers College. And finally, following in the tradition of Thorndike's emphasis on learning and the measurement thereof, my own work, especially for the last 5 years, has been focused on trying to measure something called learning agility, that is being able to learn under a variety of circumstances, and so being agile about the way in which we learn. I've been trying to measure that quality. I was almost going to use an expletive because it's been such hard work to try to get that measured. So far, only 5 years, and I'm not there yet, but close, very close. Stay tuned for early 2014. You're going to hear about learning agility and its measurement. In any case, that's the tradition that we're talking about with respect to Thorndike and what we're talking about today. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about my namesake, so to speak, Edward Lee Thorndike.